suspect that Mark put the UN decolonisation issue at the end because it might be regarded in independence terms as the last throw of the dice, to use the other term that Sarah was using about the casino. But anyway, the interesting thing, I think, to remember here is that decolonisation is regarded by the UN as independence. This goes back to what Peter was asking, what is independence? And the 60-odd other countries that have left the UK and decolonised would all tell you they have decolonised. And that was what independence is and was, and how even the UN in some regards regard Ireland as having decolonised too. So the two fundamentals here, I think, to think about is, first of all, how do we define colonialism? And the second thing is, under the UN Declaration of the Rights of Non-Self-Governing Territories to declare independence, is how do we define a people? And the first aspect of that, I think, is important. We have to think about what is colonialism. And it's not a name or word, rather, we've heard much about. In the UK, we have a union, or we think we have a union. But colonialism is actually quite straightforward. It's mainly about economic plunder. It's mainly about economic exploitation. And it's mainly about political control. And these two aspects, I think, loom very large in Scotland's case. And we then can see why our nation is not as developed as it could be. It's not... doesn't have a high GDP as it could have. It doesn't trade as well as it could have, although it has a lot of interesting aspects. Most of the value is extracted out by powerful entities from outside Scotland. So Scotland is well and truly plundered. Yeah. So it fits these two dimensions pretty well. The other aspect, which may or may not occur with colonialism, is settler occupation. Now, settler occupation is a difficult subject for some reason where in the nationalist side of things to discuss, but the reality of the census tells us, and historical census tells us, that Scotland has been subject to very significant settler occupation, particularly from what in colonial terms is called the mother country. Now, that is on record, that has happened. It also relates to other research in colonialism, which is called internal colonialism, also referred to by some as domestic colonialism. And this is where territory within a state is subject to colonial oppression. And in here we have then the territory itself is subject to what is known as a cultural division of labour. So the elite positions, the top posts are all advertised in the metropolitan capital, and the people taking these posts tend to be of the culture and the values of the powerful dominant entity in the union, or whatever you want to call it. So we have that situation, and that is the reality we have. That creates then a cultural hegemony, which is mostly Anglophone, mostly unionist. And in colonialism, what we have to remember here is what is sovereign is the values of the colonizer. That is what is sovereign, and that is what we see. And the native population are informed in no uncertain terms that the likelihood of liberation, independence, if you like, is another word for liberation, is the likelihood of liberation is remote, is always remote. The barriers for this are always raised. The hurdles are always brought in and raised. The other aspect we have to remember in post-colonial theory is the fact that, and this goes to many, many different examples, is that a dominant national party reaches a cooperative arrangement with the imperial or colonial power. The other aspect to colonialism, of course, is colonialism is always a cooperative venture between not just the dominant power and culture, but the native elites. And the native elites take on the culture, language, mores, values, all the rest of it, of the dominant power. And they become, in some respects, the even worst oppressor. So there's different levels of oppression here. Colonialism, of course, we can also relate to culture and language. And the language of the dominant power is the language emphasized at all times. And the language of the native is discarded and destroyed. So or the languages of the natives, as we see in Scotland. So the languages of Scots isn't taught to the Scots bairns in the schools, and that is part of the nature. It's where the language of the people is not the language of their education is not the language of their culture. And this brings us to what Professor Tom Devine regarded as the dual persona of Scots, this confused identity of being British and Scottish. It's actually an outcome of colonialism. It wouldn't exist without colonialism. So there we are. I think the other aspect I was going to cover was the nature of the national party. The dominant national party in colonialism reaches an arrangement with the dominant imperial power, if you like. They take the foot off the gas. They take the people up blind alleys. They delay independence. And this is a very dangerous thing to do because it creates the potential for conflict. So this is a very dangerous and difficult strategy that the National Party is pursuing at the moment. And it can be seen with the exodus of people out of the SNP, the creation of new national parties. And these are normal occurrences in the decolonization process. And I would say we are in the decolonization process. We have been since probably before devolution. This is a long period of trying to get to understanding the condition. And the condition we have to remember is a psychological condition. So although we might produce manifestos for this and do policy issues on that, we have to remember that at the end of the day, for many Scots, many natives in the colonial environment, it's a psychological condition. And the treatment for this is quite a difficult treatment. But and most of the great post-colonial literature on this is from the psychological perspective. So that's where we are. But going quickly to the UN, the declaration that non-self-governing peoples should be able to declare independence as a legal right. That declaration came out of the 50s, and the post-war, post-Second World War decolonizations. And at the time in the 60s when this declaration was created, there was, I think, more than 70 listed territories. There are now 17 still there, mostly small island groups and so on. So the work is ongoing, but the UN was quite emphatic. This declaration has legal standing. It's about removing the old empire powers. That's what the Declaration on Self-Determination, Liberation, Independence, Decolonization is about. It's about removing the oppressions and injustices of the empires, the former empires, particularly France, Britain, and the United States, to remove their powers and injustices and treaty violations. Because let's remember here also that many, if not most, if not all colonies were sitting with a treaty, as Scotland is sitting with a treaty. But we know it's not respected. Its conditions are not respected, as Sarah said. But this is all part and parcel of the process. In the colonial reality, a people's history is discarded. It's removed. It's rephrased and restated. Its cultural heritage is all changed to reflect to reflect commemoration of the oppressor's greatness, as we see in so many monuments and even street names in Scotland. We have the same legacy as Ireland and many other places have had. So that's the reality. As to decolonization as an activity, that requires a territory, a non-self-governing territory, to be listed with the UN Decolonization Committee C24. That requires, I believe, member state to propose a listing of a territory for decolonization. Whether or not that could be done by the Scottish government themselves, I don't know. But I've been involved in European Union initiatives where the signature of a Scottish government minister is sufficient to get recognition by even the European Union for certain aspects of funding for different things. So Scottish government as an arm of the British state, as a department, as a spending department of the British state, and as a legal entity in its own and democratic one, however defined, has standing, and I don't believe there's it's not impossible for the Scottish Government to propose Scotland's listing as a colony for decolonisation, or even to have a permanent representation at the UN before C24, to then further develop the priority to prioritise the decolonisation, because let's remember the UN regard colonialism as a scourge, a form of punishment levelled on a people that should be removed, and that it calls on the administrative powers, the empire powers, if you like, to be on the right side of history, and not to provoke conflict and all the rest of it that comes with that. Where a people is, and I should just mention a definition of a people. Yes, a people has to be properly defined. And previous cases have all shown the importance of common history, heritage, national languages, culture, common suffering, and will to be a people, a will to be a nation. And in this regard, we should also remember that Scotland has had one of the highest outmigrations of its population of any Western European country of a similar size, possibly the most. And a lot of that was reflecting UK regulations and barbarity. So we shouldn't. The other thing to mention here is that in a legal sense, Supreme Courts in other countries have recognized territories for independence where they have suffered injustices and still suffer injustices and still suffer oppression. And oppression comes in many forms, whether it's socio-linguistic, the cultural, the language, the economic plunder, the political exploitation, and so on. It comes in many ways, and it ends up where you see millions of people living in or close to poverty in your own country who can't get access to the resources. The resources are all plundered. And the benefits of colonialism are basically equivalent to the exploitation of the people. And we go back to what Sarah was saying about the common good aspect of the claim of right, which is a fundamental part of what we're about. The UN decolonisation process is a route. We're already following a decolonisation process. Independence is decolonisation. That takes a little bit of getting our heads around. The Union is a bit of a charade. Treaties are always violated by imperial powers. We shouldn't expect anything else. So what we are doing here is perfectly sensible. It's not a situation that can be maintained or sustained. Colonialism is geographic violence, it is force, it is oppression, and it should be ended.